Hi everyone, this is Nick Pollock here from Roar Lions Roar. While you're here, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that alert bell so you never miss any of our new content. And if you prefer to listen instead of watch, make sure you check us out on your podcast platform of choice where you can subscribe and download each new episode. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening. Go State!
Hi everyone, welcome to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. I'm your host Bill DeFilippo, joined tonight by one of the Matts, but I don't recognize this one. Who are you again?
I am Matt DeBear. I remembered how to plug in my microphone and put the headphones on, and I think I remember how to talk. So we're going to find that out over the next 45 minutes or an hour or so.
Yeah, one Matt was unable to be here, so the other Matt is here. And it's interesting because I thought for sure the other Matt would really make it a point to want to be on this podcast because this is a really big game for Penn State. This was a game that had the potential to go belly up and lead to people asking some pretty big questions about the Nittany Lions under James Franklin. But instead, Matt, we're sitting here on Sunday evening talking about a 26-25 win over Minnesota to move to 10-1 on the season, 7-1 in conference play. And, I won't speak in absolutes yet because anything could happen in the final game of the year. But for all intents and purposes, Penn State's sitting real pretty to earn its first playoff berth.
Yeah, it was, on a Saturday that saw, I think it was 7 of the top 20 teams lost, including a couple, I believe, top 10 teams. Obviously, Indiana falling at Ohio State. I don't know where A&M fell in the list. I don't remember where Alabama fell in the list, but obviously some teams went on the road to some tough environments against some good, not great teams, much like Penn State saw in Minnesota and didn't get the job done. So it very much felt like a survive in advance kind of Saturday, given what some other playoff contenders went through and weren't able to get done on Saturday afternoon.
And Matt, the thing that I find really interesting about this game, obviously you and me and, our friends and whatnot have been doing what any Penn State fans have been doing today. Been talking about this win, celebrating this win, celebrating kind of in the big picture what this means for Penn State. But something that is really interesting that I've been trying to think about today, and I'm interested in your thoughts on this, and I know I'm springing this on you out of left field, but other than the turnovers where Minnesota turned the ball over more than Penn State did, this game really did have a lot of the ingredients for a loss for Penn State. 1 for 11 on third down, weren't really able to run the football, didn't really have a ton of possession, gave up 9, essentially 2 points directly via special teams, a special teams mistake, but for all intents and purposes, 9 points on special teams mistakes. And of those 2 points, that was actually a 3-point swing in total because it went from 1 point for Penn State to 2 points for Minnesota. And despite that, we're obviously going to compare this to a lot of Penn State losses in the past, or Penn State wins in the past, not just similar to the USC game, but Purdue 2021, Auburn 2020, Wisconsin 2020, and how Penn State had to hold on to win those games. But the thing that was so interesting to me about this, Matt, was that this was really the first time in this, 3-4 year stretch of Penn State football where we've never seen the offense have to go out there and play keep away to win them the football game. And that is a new thing that we saw at Penn State, but boy, did it feel good to watch them do it.
Oh yeah. And it was, I'm sitting on the couch watching this while my wife and daughter are on the other side of the room, desperately hoping that this turns out well, because Dad does not want to, we don't want Dad to be upset for the next 24 hours or whatever it would have been. But yeah, it's to go out and kind of, what James Franklin said after the game, win the game on their terms, in a different way than, like you just said, than we've really seen them do in some of these close wins they've had over the last, 4 or 5 years, however far along you want to go back. The thing that kind of jumped out to me, just thinking bigger picture about the game and thinking about, some of these moments. And like you said, they, a lot of the ingredients were there for the upset, the special teams mistakes, the defense missing tackles, just some of those things you look at some of these other games that the favorite lost on Saturday, and a lot of those things were there. Ole Miss had how many turnovers at Florida? How many interceptions did Milroe throw against Oklahoma? Penn State took care of the ball. They had the blocked punt and the extra point. But I think the thing that jumps out to me, I'm looking at the scoring summary here. It felt like every time Penn State's offense, even before the last drive where they salted the game away, they responded when they needed to. They went down 10 points early in the second quarter. They hit Omari Evans less than just over 2 minutes after that to pull within 7. They force, I believe, a 3 and out, and then get the or was that the interception, the DeLuca interception maybe, and immediately make it 10-10. Minnesota goes down, blocks the punt, scores right away. Looks like Penn State's going into the locker room with a touchdown deficit. They go down, and Drew Aller kind of has one of those signature drives that we've seen going back to USC. Makes the plays, gets them within a score. Would have been a tie game without the block extra point. Even they go down 22-16 early in the third quarter, and it wasn't the next drive, but they hold Minnesota on a couple of drives. Singleton gets the touchdown. They drive down the field. They force the turnover. I know it was kind of an unforced error by Minnesota, but they recover the fumble, get the field goal to make it a touchdown game. Now I think the offense made the plays when they needed to make them, and then obviously the 3 4th down conversions at the end to really kill the game. But it was the offense kept coming up yesterday when they needed to. It wasn't pretty. It's funny. You look at Drew Aller's numbers, and he was, I think, 21-28 for almost 250 yards and the touchdown. Didn't have the turnover. Had the rushing touchdown to pull Penn State within a point before the block kick. But even then, he's 21-28, but it felt like he was even a little bit off. He missed the long touchdown throw to Evans in the second half. There was that throw to Trey Wallace on the sideline. I can't remember what drive that was on, where he had him on the out pattern. It just was a little bit off. But when it mattered, Aller made plays. Singleton made plays. Warren made plays. The guys that you lean on offense made plays in the moments that they needed them all day, really, even if it wasn't pretty a lot of the time.
Yeah, Aller had his this was his third straight game with a QBR of at least 80 or higher, which is the longest streak of his career so far. I want to read the quote that you mentioned from Franklin, because I think this is a quote that really does sum up the mentality of how this team approached this final stretch of the game. But essentially, Matt, we have friends who I don't think will be upset if we mention this, but like, we have some friends who were kind of James Franklin skeptics. We know there are James Franklin skeptics out there. The people, he's a good coach, but maybe his time is coming towards an end here. Maybe like Penn State's just not able to get over that final hump. We have a lot of friends who have been really happy with Franklin and really proud of Franklin for how he went out and had his team take the game from Minnesota. And I think that's an important distinction. It wasn't, again, Wisconsin in 2020, Auburn in 2020, to an extent Purdue in 2021, where the offense just kind of gets what they can, and then you're just white knuckling it, hoping the defense gets the job done. Offense went out there and took the game. On that final drive, Luke Reynolds' fake punt ends up getting a first down for Penn State. That's 1 4th down conversion, another 4th down conversion when Drew Aller did the QB sneak, and the third 4th down conversion to ice the game when Aller lobbed it up to Tyler Warren for a catch. And Franklin, after the game, said, quote, "I just felt like we needed to try to end the game on our terms with the ball in our hands. Give them a ton of credit. They did a good job of producing yards and finding a way. Their field goal kicker was back to the guy from last year. Started out the season a little rocky, but was kicking the ball very, very well tonight. And the second half of the season's been kicking well. So I just felt like, be aggressive, end the game on our terms with the ball in our hands and those things. And as I told you guys before, I'll click over and talk to the defense as well and get their thoughts. So just proud of our guys." And I'm going to bring up something nobody wants to mention, Matt. This felt exactly the opposite, because it was the exact opposite role of what Penn State was in when they played Ohio State, where Penn State's defense just needed to get one stop to try to have that last opportunity. And Ohio State said, no, we are the bigger, the better, the more talented, the more everything football team. You are not taking this from us. And I have to admit, it feels really good to be on the other side of that.
Yeah, and I've seen a couple comparisons to that today. The opposite scenario with Ohio State's offense after the goal line stand late in the fourth quarter. Penn State didn't get the ball back. There was probably the clock was probably at a really similar point if I go back and think about it. Around 5-6 minutes left, and I think Penn State had 3 timeouts. There's the 2-minute timeout now, and you really think I don't think Ohio State had faced any fourth downs in that scenario, but Minnesota got 3 stops. Really 2 crucial stops. They got a 3 and out before the fake punt. They got another third down stop with just over 2 minutes left with the ball, kind of at the fringe of field goal range for Penn State. And I don't know, this is, hindsight 2020 sort of thing. But if there's a kicker with a bigger leg, if it's, years past where they've had the kicker who had the 50-yard plus leg, does he maybe try and kick the field goal there with just over 2 minutes left? But regardless of the circumstance that led up to it, it was cathartic in a way.
Yeah.
To stomp out hope of the upset. And that's what Penn State would have been, if they beat Ohio State. That's an upset. I don't know what the point spread was, but if Penn State beats Ohio State this year, that's an upset. As the bigger, better, stronger, faster team, Penn State on that drive, not even on the fourth down plays. They made plays that led up to that led to fourth down and shorts that made those decisions easier. If it's 4th and 4, 4th and 5, they're probably kicking it. They're at punting or field goal. They're probably not going for it in that situation. But Singleton, who struggled a lot of the day, made some plays on that drive. I don't have the whole drive summary in front of me. But
I have it here. 3rd and 9. Drew Aller runs for 8 yards. Evades a little pressure, able to get 8 of the 9 yards. That led to the Reynolds. That led to Reynolds doing what he did. 2nd and 8. Aller runs for 7 yards. They try going to the Warren package. That doesn't work, so they go tush push after that. And then 3rd and 10. Singleton's able to pick up 9 yards and puts him in a situation where, like you mentioned, it would have gotten down to about 20, 25 seconds left. Penn State probably ends up kicking the field goal, and they probably would have ended up being fine. But being able to go out there, an interesting thing on that very final play, they took away what Penn State wanted. Penn State has mentioned it. They thought they were going to be able to get Singleton out in the flat, dump it off to him, and just fall down. And Aller does a ridiculous job staying upright, keeping his eyes down the field, evading pressure, and seeing that Warren was able to sneak behind their defense and get open and sit down. So, all of these things, Matt, like you mentioned, everyone's going to talk about the fourth downs. One thing that I found really impressive about Penn State in this game, really on both sides of the football, we'll obviously give the defense their credit a little bit later in the podcast. On both sides of the football, for the most part, when they needed to make that one play that they needed to make, and PJ Fleck said after I think his exact quote after the game was, Penn State made one more play than we did. Whenever Penn State needed to just get Minnesota a little bit behind the sticks, just make Minnesota settle for a field goal, just put themselves in a position where they can get something a little bit more manageable on 4th down, whatever it might be, they did a really good job rising to that moment.
Yeah, and I think you highlighting some of those Drew Aller scrambles there on that game clinching drive. I'm sure it's been talked about all year, how much more mobile he is, how much better his pocket awareness is. I made a comment during the game yesterday. It was a play where Minnesota blitzed, and I think they actually got the sack on the play, where in a way Aller it seems like he doesn't recognize the blitz as quickly as you think. It's still a growth process, a learning process. But I think it was you, Bill, that actually made the comment. He trusts his ability to make that guy miss, and he's really done it pretty consistently all year.
Yes.
It's not always the prettiest. He's not not running like Josh Allen, and certainly not running like some of the Sean Clifford or some of those guys that we've seen at Penn State recently. But he's developed this knack, whether it's with his arm, with his legs, to make that play when you need it. And like I was saying earlier, that was kind of the mantra of the offense all day. They weren't making the plays consistently, but as good teams do, when you need it, you make the play that you need to make, whether that's converting the first down, whether that's getting the response score, whether that's protecting the football like they've done all year and they did again yesterday. And it's been the guys, like I was saying earlier, it's Aller, it's Singleton, it's Warren. Trey Wallace had a really solid day yesterday. He didn't score, but he had a couple big catches during the game. The guys that you lean on, and they did it on offense or on the line too. We talk about Singleton. They kind of found a little bit of success with that off tackle run off the left side in the second half for some bigger runs. The numbers still aren't great. I think you take Reynolds' run out. I think they had like 70 yards rushing or something like that. But they hit enough of those positive plays throughout the game to put them in a position to be able to have that drive at the end.
Yeah, I just looked and I did the math. Our end of the game with sack adjusted, so take his 2 sacks out of it, 7 rushes for 30 yards. He ended with about 4.2 yards per carry, which, funny enough, was actually very limited sample size here. Bo Perbula ran it one time for 4 yards. So Drew legitimately did some good things with his legs in this football game. We'll come back to the offense in a bit because I want to make sure we get a bit of time to talk about the defense. And we're going to start with the defense as we look at Penn State on both sides of the football here. And Matt, it's funny. It was an impressive performance by the defense, in part because they were overcoming mistakes that they were making in how they kind of struggled to tackle, in how Minnesota was able to find a little bit of success throwing the football by just getting the ball out really quick. And the receivers were able to get into just like these tiny little pockets of space that Penn State's defense was able to give them. And yet 9 tackles for loss consistently put Minnesota into situations where it had to pick up more yards. It, was off schedule in a way that they just kind of struggle to come back from. And not if you take out the 9 points that special teams essentially handed them, again, suddenly we're looking at 27-16 win for Penn State, something like that. I'm like, yeah, that's something that sounds like it would be right for a game like this.
Yeah, I made the comment to someone earlier today that if you take the special teams plays out of it, which obviously you can't, someone made the comment yesterday, Bill, that, other than special teams, well, it's a third of the game. But without those plays,
please go tell James Franklin if you take special teams out of it and see what he does. I guarantee he would rip your head off.
Exactly. But it plays out a lot like the Wisconsin game. Just a tough, hard-nosed team, plays good defense, isn't great on offense, but does what they do well. They do what they're solid at. They're solid at, and it's hard to stop. You know what they're going to do. That's kind of what it was. But you also, I'm looking at the numbers here. They made those plays. Zane Durant was a monster yesterday, despite getting held all day. Kobe King had a huge game. Jalen Reed, I thought was really, really good. They, other than that first drive, they didn't. They had the short field after the block punt. They didn't really. They held them out of the end zone. And in the second half, they, really didn't give up a whole lot until that drive that led to the field goal that cut it to the 1-point game with 5 or 6 minutes left. They, like you said, that they overcame some of the things that were self-inflicted. They did not tackle. I think it was in Sean Fitz's recap today that Pro Football Focus had him at 16 or 17 missed tackles, I believe. I don't know what that was by half, but it was, my wife made the comment today watching the Lions game, make a tackle. She goes, "Oh my God, I sound like you." I don't know how many times on Saturday I see, just make the tackle. And it wasn't like it was one guy in particular. It was kind of just an epidemic. And credit Wisconsin or credit Minnesota for making guys miss in certain situations. But just it felt like it's probably the least complete game the defense has played start to finish all year. And they were obviously, again, much better in the second half, gave up just the 6 points in the second half. I don't know what the yardage adjustment by half is, but they made the adjustments after the break. And again, they, much like the offense, when they needed to make plays, they did. They got the DeLuca interception was a really timely play right after getting the touchdown, the first touchdown of the game. Coming up with the fumble recovery after the Brosmer, I don't know what you would call that, drop.
The ball slipped out of his hand.
It was just kind of a fluke play.
Penn State was very lucky, and Minnesota was very unlucky that Penn State just had someone right there.
But they made the play, and the ball kind of bounced around a little bit, and there was probably a chance for both teams to make the recovery at some point during that. But they were opportunistic in that scenario. I think we're all thinking as Minnesota's driving down on that drive that led to the field goal that cut it to 1 point. When they cross midfield, okay, get the stop. Okay, they're within 30. Okay, hold to the field goal. They get inside the 10. Oh God, dear God, hold to the field goal. And they came up with the plays. I know there was the throwback screen to the tackle eligible play that Carter read really well. They had great coverage on third down. I don't remember the first down play there. I think it was a run that they kind of just stopped at the line.
Got stopped, yeah.
So they tightened up when they needed to. They've really done that most of the year. They've been a really good red zone defense. But again, on a day where with those the missed tackles especially, where you worry about ingredients for an upset, they did just enough when it was needed to avoid that.
Yeah, I think part of it is you have to tip your hat to Minnesota. I thought that the way that they were able to, again, stay on schedule, pick up what they needed, pick up what they want, and to be patient with that and to be willing to do that for an entire football game, that's not easy. They, a drive of 9 plays, a drive of 7 plays, a drive of 8 plays, a drive of 9 plays, a drive of 6 plays, a drive of 11 plays. There were 4 possessions for each team in the second half because both teams just held on to the football for lengthy stretches. And it would have been really easy for Minnesota to get away from that, especially once Penn State bottled up their running game in the second half. And I'll read that stat here in a second. But part of this game is, again, just tipping your hat to Minnesota, tipping your hat to Max Brosmer for, how many times has Gary Danielson during the broadcast, I think at one point Gary compared his release to not quite Aaron Rodgers' butt. If
there was a Tom Brady comparison at some point too. I don't remember what the context was.
God, I love Brad and Gary, man. They are so goddamn funny. But yeah, they're getting the ball out quick. They're trying to negate Penn State's pass rush, and they did a very good job negating Penn State's pass rush. The only guy who was able to get a sack was Tony Rojas in a play where coverage was good. It was mostly a coverage sack. Rojas just breaks when Brosmer leaves the pocket and is able to take him down. But they got the ball out quick enough. It was almost like Bowling Green-y in how they were just getting the ball snapped, get the ball out. Do not let Abdul Carter, Deny Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant, etc. get to you. But what I think Penn State did really well, not 19, that would be 17 points in the first half were scored on the defense with, again, obviously a touchdown coming off of a big special teams miscue, and then 6 points in the second half. I thought the way that they bottled up Minnesota's running game in the second half. First half, Darius Taylor, 10 carries, 50 yards, 5 yards per carry. Marcus Majors, 7 carries, 44 yards, 4.7 yards per carry. That's a really good and really consistent running game. And if Minnesota had that all game, I think they probably end up winning. But in the second half, Taylor had 7 carries for 8 yards, and Majors had 3 carries for -7 yards. And when that happens, when Penn State was able to bottle up their rushing attack better as the half went on, it's not a surprise to me that Minnesota started to struggle to finish drives when you mentioned that first and goal. That first play of the drive was a run for -1 yards and put them in situations where they basically had to throw on second and third down against a Penn State defense that knew they had to throw the football. On the first drive of the second half where they got a field goal, 3rd and 3, they handed off to Taylor, loss of 2 yards, puts them in a situation where they have to settle for a field goal again. And Matt, for as much as the defense did get some criticism in the first half, I think a bit of it was deserved. Not, I think people always are going to get a little bit carried away when you allow 2 touchdowns, but a bit of it was deserved. I didn't think they, like you mentioned, tackled especially well. Didn't think that they did an especially good job against the running game and, made it a little bit easier in the passing game for Minnesota. I think they deserve a ton of credit of consistently getting Minnesota behind the sticks. You mentioned Zane Durant. Zane Durant, I thought that probably was the best game that he has played in a Penn State jersey, with just how disruptive he was and how much he single-handedly took away things between the tackles for Minnesota. But they kept putting them behind the sticks, kept making them settle for field goals. And when you get that, when you were able to kind of have your defense take the air out of things that way, that makes it so much easier for you to be able to fend off a team that was really, really fighting to pull off the upset in the game.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned those first and second half rushing numbers, and I'm not breaking any news here, but Minnesota is one of those teams where they absolutely have to stay on schedule. They can't get into 2nd and 8. 3rd and 5. They need to be in 2nd and 6, 3rd and 3. Whether that's through passing or not. But we saw it most of the day yesterday. They're not, you just said, they're not holding onto the ball very long when they are throwing the ball. Because they don't have, especially against a team like Penn State, they're not going to hold up protecting the quarterback that well. In the first half, there was a lot of 2nd and 6, 3rd and 3, 2nd and 4. Very much on schedule, being able to run their offense the way they would prefer to. In the second half, they just weren't. They weren't able to run the ball effectively on first and second down. They were put into situations where they don't have the passing game to convert 3rd and 8, whether it's protecting Brosmer, whether that's guys that are getting open consistently. And they hit a few. I was really impressed by Brosmer. Just his ability to get the ball out, very accurate. That throw that where Reed lit the receiver up. Just a great play all around by everyone.
Yeah.
If Reed's a half second earlier, it's intercepted. But just great throw, great catch, great play by Reed. Just a less than a half second late. I was really impressed with their ability to make the plays downfield with just enough consistency to stay in the game. But I think a lot of that was set up by being in a 2nd and 4, where Penn State, they're not going to get their pass rush package on the field. They're probably not manning up against receivers. They're probably playing a little bit more conservatively just because they're in that down and distance where the whole playbook's open. And so they were able to, again, I'm repeating myself a little bit here, making the plays when they needed to get them off schedule just enough. That goal line, or not goal line stand, but that goal to go stand, they make the play on first down. Instead of it being 2nd goal from the 4 or 5, it's 2nd goal from the 8 or 9. That's a big difference. That really changes what you're going to do. The screen pass on 2nd down to the tackle eligible, probably not the play I would have called, but again, you put a team in a position where, okay, we're at 2nd and 8 now, basically 2nd and 8 with goal to go. And we don't have a play for that. So we're going to try and get a little bit creative. And that's what happens.
And it was also trying to take advantage of the fact that Penn State's defense, really aggressive, really wants to try, the see ball, get ball mentality that makes this defense fun, but also you could take advantage. I mean, we saw it on the like double reverse pass that they have for the touchdown, where Penn State's just out of sorts because everyone's running all over the place. If you go back and watch that, if Abdul Carter doesn't see that specifically, and this is one of those like evolutions of Abdul Carter's game thing, if that exact thing happens against him earlier in the season, I think he just says, I just got to get to Brosmer faster here. And he just takes off at him and makes it so Brosmer can get that pass over to, I think Ursery was the tackle he was trying to throw it to. And Ursery can then rumble forward, whether it's for 2 or 3 yards, whether it's for 8 yards, I don't know. But Abdul Carter blows that entire play up by just being patient in a way that I don't think he was a month ago. I don't think he was a month and a half ago, whatever that would be. And like you mentioned, Matt, when you put them in that kind of a situation where Penn State can then, you have to defend, 54 yards wide, but only 10, 15 yards deep with the end zone. Yeah, Penn State's going to be fine in that situation most of the time.
Well, we saw it on third down too, on the incomplete pass before the field goal. They, I don't know if they got a whole lot of pressure on Brosmer, but they took away what they've been doing all day. They could be more aggressive in jumping routes and playing man coverage and doing what they are better suited to do as a secondary. I think it was Harris that had the coverage on that play and had great coverage and forced the high throw. They were putting themselves in positions where they could control what they dictated more what was going to happen. Whereas in the first half, it was a lot more was Minnesota's offense dictating what was going to happen by being on schedule.
Yeah, and I also want to make sure, something that we did mention, but I want to make sure that we give the defense a little bit of credit here. Minnesota only scored 2 touchdowns this entire game. The first one was on their first drive of the game, which was their scripted drive, where, they went out, they knew exactly what they wanted to do, and they were able to go out and do it. Credit to them. And their second touchdown drive came off of, the block punt that gave them only 21 yards of field to work with. Now, not the best thing in the world that they went out and on just the first play went and scored a touchdown. But yeah, I mentioned it after it happened, Matt. If Penn State ended up losing that game, I thought a really big moment was going to be that after the interception that Brosmer threw, Penn State had a run for 4 yards by Pribula, a sack on Aller for a loss of 8 yards, and incompletion and a field goal. And, on the not long after that, there was a for all intents and purposes, that's a turnover when you block a punt and you're deep in the opposing team's territory. Penn State got 3 points when that happened for them. Minnesota got 7 points when that happened for them. But they ended up settling down on defense after that, again, holding them to field goals, taking advantage of the one big mistake that Minnesota made. And as a result, we're here talking about Penn State being 10-1 and surviving a really fun upset bid. And now we're going to talk about the offense in a second. But Matt, are you aware of this thing called home field apparel?
I'm well aware of this thing called home field apparel.
And why is that?
They do a really good job of marketing to people like us.
I've never actually heard it put that way, but yeah, that's a really good way to sum up home field apparel. They do a good job marketing to people like me and Matt, which I presume means in Matt's eyes, people whose wardrobes are mostly made up of clothing that has their alma mater on it in one way or another. Home Field, of course, has been the sponsor of this podcast since we decided to go podcast only back in 2022, and they've been nothing but great for us in the time that we've been working with them, because they are a brand that, like Matt mentioned, does stuff for fans, does stuff for people like you, does stuff for people like me, and makes apparel that people like you and people like me want to wear. They have really cool designs. I've been made aware of the process that goes into how they come up with their designs. And it really is impressive just how much work they are able to put into making sure that you are wearing the best possible thing to represent your school. And of course, they don't just have Penn State stuff in their collection. Obviously, their Penn State stuff is fantastic with t-shirts, with crew necks, with quarter zips, with joggers, with jackets, with just about anything you could potentially want. I am currently wearing one of my favorite hoodies from the Home Field Penn State collection. But if you are a fan of another school, odds are Home Field Apparel is going to have something for you. And with the holidays rolling around, getting someone something from Home Field Apparel is a really, really good way to make sure you're taking care of them during this holiday season. So if you want to make sure you can get your hands on something from Home Field Apparel, you can use the promo code RLR24 to get 15% off of your first order. One more time, promo code is RLR24 for 15% off of your first order. Thank you again to Home Field Apparel for sponsoring the podcast. And Matt, we've already done a little bit of this, but let's talk about Penn State's offense a little bit more in this game. And I want to give you my general hypothesis that 2 moments by James Franklin involving the offense won them this game. Can you guess what they were?
The obvious choices would be something on that last drive.
The fake punt, yes.
And the quarterback sneak. They can't both be in the last drive.
The second one is you go to the first Penn State drive of the second half. Minnesota had just come out and just kicked a field goal after a 9-play, 51-yard drive to open things up. First Penn State drive of the second half. 7 plays. It goes for 37 yards. It stalls out at Minnesota's 38. And what ends up happening? Penn State.
Was that a prompt?
No, I just took a breath at a bad time. Penn State decides for whatever reason to have Tyler Warren punt the football. And nobody was more upset about Tyler Warren punting the football than Drew Aller, because Penn State sent its offense out there, had Aller do some stuff that made it look like he was trying to draw Minnesota offside. They do that. It's 4th and 4 from the 33. And yeah, you could justify going forward to kicking a field goal there. But he starts getting real demonstrative, jumping up and down, demanding a timeout. The refs don't give it for some reason. The refs were kind of weird all game. Warren has this terrible punt, and Franklin heads right over to the side, and Aller heads to the sideline as pissed off as I have ever seen Drew Aller. And Franklin yells at him for a second and then goes over to him after he's had a sec to himself and gets him to calm down. He missed throws on second and third down. The second and third down leading out to that Warren punt. After that, Matt, 6 for 7, 67 yards for Drew Aller. In the second half, Penn State ran the ball 20 times for 105 yards. And I really do think that James Franklin taking that time to get his quarterback to calm down a bit on the heels of, yes, the fake punt, but also he missed a layup, what would have been a touchdown to Amari Evans on second or third down there, and almost like an exact replica of the touchdown they scored earlier in the game. He does that. He gets Drew Aller to settle down, and we see basically the very best of the Penn State offense on its final 3 drives of that game.
Yeah, it was. And there's been a lot of conversation about that today too. And a lot of what you said, just a great coaching moment to recognize, the fire that they both had in the immediacy of whatever that 4th down play was. I enjoyed.
Do you think who do you think was right there? Tyler Warren to get the ball and punt it, or Drew Aller to try and call it? Because I truly have zero idea what the hell was going on there.
I don't even know where to start. But my first in the immediacy of after the play and Warren punts the ball, we've seen Franklin run, the pooch punt play with other. I think Tommy Stevens did it back in the day. I swear they've done it a couple other times. I'm trying to think here. Maybe it was O'Brien that had hacked.
Warren was an all-state punter in high school, so it at least made some sense to have that idea with him.
Yeah, and so my immediate thought was that was Aller acting all demonstrative. When I saw it live, I thought, okay, he's calling timeout. There's some confusion, and then when he punted, okay, maybe he wasn't making the timeout signal. He clearly was in the replay. So, like they did most of the game, the refs did not see something happening on the field. But my immediate thought, before we even saw the replay was, it was just kind of maybe we can get them to jump off sides. If they don't, we're going to snap it to Warren. He's going to do the little pooch punt. Obviously, it wasn't a great punt at all. I think it was 15 yards or something. But then you see what, the replay. He's trying to call timeout. He comes over the sidelines, like you said. Franklin's fired up. Aller's fired up. They kind of have share a few words. They're both not terribly happy with each other at that moment. And I thought both moments of this are really good coaching on Franklin's part. He lets him go, ends the debate, we'll call it, at that point, gives him that second to cool off, then comes over, very calm, and just having a conversation with him. And then you said he comes out 6 for 7 to end the game, makes those great plays with his legs on the last drive. There were the throw to Warren to end it. Made some big plays that we were talking about earlier. We've seen it a lot more with Aller this year. The fire, both good and bad, and I think we said before, the offense really struggled for a lot of that game.
Mm-hmm.
And like a lot of players, especially young players, guys start to press a little bit. And I think in that moment, it was in danger of going off the rails a little bit. If they don't have that conversation, who's to say Aller doesn't come back out on that next drive and gets overly aggressive, throws an interception, forces something that's not there. They don't move the ball down the field the way they are, because they go out and they get the touchdown on the next drive after that, if my memory's right. Who's to say they make those plays on that next drive if Aller's still kind of hot under the collar a little bit? As far as moments in the game, that's probably one of those ones that's underrated, because it had nothing to do with a play on the field. It wasn't a play that swung the game. But I think it's probably fair to say Aller had kind of been building to that blow up, and it just all kind of came to a head after that 4th down play, where either he really wanted to go for it or he was frustrated with the confusion. Whatever it was, if that's not brought back under control, I think you're right. I don't think you see what they did on the following 3 drives to go out and win the game at the end.
Yeah, that very next drive, 5-play, 57-yard touchdown drive, Aller to Warren, Singleton run for 15 yards, Singleton run for 12 yards. And it seemed like in the second half, especially a little bit later in the game, as they, you look at the final 3 drives: completion for 12 yards, completion for 8 yards, completion for 10 yards, completion for 14 yards, completion for 12 yards. Completion ended the game with the completion to Warren. That was a little bit different, but it was almost like the passing game opened things up for the running game in the second half. And we saw Penn State's running game really struggle to get going. I thought that Minnesota's defensive line in the first half was just awesome. Like, they were just winning consistently against Penn State in the trenches. And, for whatever reason, Kaytron Allen didn't get any carries in the first half. It was the Nick Singleton show. Singleton was not great. I have his first half numbers here. 5 carries for 15 yards. In the short yardage situations, they wanted to go with Warren, and that didn't work especially well. But as the game went on, it seemed to me like Penn State's offensive line settled down a little bit, started to win a little bit more in the trenches, opened up some holes that Singleton especially, Allen was able to eventually get in and start running, but Singleton did a great job, picking up what was there for him in the second half. There were a few times where I think he was, one guy away, one fingertip tackle away from a 7-8 yard carry turning into a 40-50 yard carry, which hoping he's able to get that. But I thought a lot of this game, Matt, came down to how willing Penn State's passing offense was to take what Minnesota was giving them, outside of really the 2 shots to Omari Evans, one that went for a touchdown, one Aller was just sped up a little bit, didn't quite get his feet right and put it out in front of him a little too much. And then that strike that he threw to Warren up the seed, which he threw that, I just got right off of my couch. I was like, that's the NFL guy. That's the NFL Drew Aller that we all want to see every week. I thought they did a really good job kind of building their offense around their passing game, and more importantly, building their offense around the fact that, yeah, Minnesota's going to try and make sure you can't beat them over the top. That doesn't mean you're not going to have pockets of space to throw the football into, where guys like Tyler Warren, Nick Singleton, and Trey Wallace did a lot of their damage.
And I think we've seen that a lot all year, where it's frustrating as a fan that it takes a few drives or even a half to kind of figure out what they're facing and what they're going to do to respond to that. But this is a dumb, lazy comparison, but I'm going to make it anyway. Much like 2016, when they figure it out, they really figure it out. And set this past Saturday, they figured it out was probably the least productive, I guess, in a sense, as it had been all year. Obviously it was still kind of a bit of a sludge in the second half to get to move the ball, but they did figure it out. They found a way to get Warren involved. They found a way to get Singleton going in the run game. They found a way to get Wallace open on those few plays. They got Evans behind the defense a second time. They figured out what Wisconsin, how many times have I said that? Have I called Minnesota Wisconsin today?
Yeah, they're the same thing.
Exactly.
They play this weekend, so there you go.
But they figured out what Minnesota was giving them defensively, and found ways to get their best players into the game within what they were being given. And it wasn't pretty, but it was effective, just effective enough.
And I think that's basically all Penn State needed. Like I said on the preview podcast that all I wanted from Penn State was to be patient and to consistently take the things that Minnesota was giving them. And for a lot of the game, they were able to do that until, again, that final drive where they just took it. They just took the game from Minnesota. I want to give a shout out because we're going to get to game balls here in a second, but I almost feel like we haven't talked about the fake punt enough, because I don't know if you can talk about a play like that enough, because like that play almost single-handedly, I won't say single-handedly, but almost single-handedly saved Penn State's playoff berth, Matt. Again, they still have to get through and beat Maryland next week, which between you and me, I think they're probably going to end up doing that. But in that moment when everything says they are going to punt this football, everything, it is 4th and 1 from the Penn State's own 34-yard line. If they turn the ball over in that situation, 3:47 left of the game. Yeah, Penn State has all 3 timeouts. Minnesota is going to go for 4 yards and 4 yards and 4 yards until Penn State's out of timeouts, until the 2-minute timeout is over, and they're just going to kick a field goal to win that football game. And Franklin mentioned after the game, they have called that exact fake punt 6 other times this season. Dom Ruley, every single time, has checked out of it because they didn't get the look that they want. And for them to get the look that they want, for them to not have any sort of tell that it was coming, for them to block that perfectly with guys like a walk-on center in Dom Ruley, a safety turned linebacker in Dakari Nelson, and Tyler Elson, a guy who gets a ton of shit from everybody for having his physical limitations, that having the physical limitations they have, and then to snap the ball to a true freshman tight end and trust that he is going to know what he has to do in that situation. Everything about that is completely insane, and yet somehow, some way, that ended up working.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the guys involved in the play.
Mm-hmm.
Ruley's been talked about, obviously, because he's the one making the call on the field there if they're getting the look that they want to actually execute it. But everyone's a lot of attention, rightfully so, has been given to Franklin for having the will to call that in that situation where if it doesn't work, the pile of what that he's going to be dealing with after the fact is immense. So having the guts to actually call it, but the guys to execute it in that situation, we can talk all you want about, just play and execute. These are, there's a true freshman involved in it. These are kids in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
That had the, weren't too high, weren't too low, didn't tip off that was coming to, lead to a timeout or something from the Minnesota sideline. For those guys to go out and execute it so well, perfectly. The guys made the blocks. The snap was perfect. Everyone did exactly what they were supposed to do. Not that they expected to get 30 yards out of it or whatever, but everyone did exactly what they were supposed to do in the absolute biggest pressure situation that you could have that situation come up in. Franklin mentioned they had it on 5 or 6 times earlier in the year and checked out of it because they didn't get the look. I will guarantee you none of them were, as we know, they haven't had this situation. They weren't in fourth and whatever, up by a point with 6 minutes or 3.5 minutes left at that stage, where you're going to give the ball back to the team in field goal range at that point if you don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
Just from coaches to players, for a special teams unit that struggled up until that point with the block kick and the block extra point, to really redeem themselves in that situation. The special team coaching. I mean, Franklin takes and talks about the pride they take in being as good as they are on special teams. The way they practice it, the way they involve guys that play snaps, meaningful snaps on offense and defense are involved in special teams. It's that important to them to really use that third phase of the game to really, the play of the game to win the game in that situation.
And then I think for some reason I must have just blocked this out, but like connecting it to the 2 major special teams mistakes earlier in the game sent a chill down my spine. So thank you, Matthew. But for the offense to then go out and not let that go to waste, because I think that's a really important thing here. Like, for all the talk about how important that single play was, and it was obviously incredibly important. Like, again, very well might have saved the season for Penn State. After that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There were 8 more plays by the offense with 2 more 4th down conversions in there. And it would have been very easy for Penn State's offense to let a play that important go to waste. And instead, that's a play that we're going to be talking about for the rest of Luke Reynolds' time at Penn State, and for probably quite a while in Happy Valley, if this is able to spark something over this next month or two. So yeah, shout out to all those guys. Incredible performance, incredible job rising to that specific moment. Matt always comes onto this podcast and talks about how he just wants Penn State to find a way against teams like Ohio State and Michigan. Sometimes you got to be able to find a way against a team like Minnesota. And Penn State ended up finding a way against Minnesota. Matt, let's hand out some game balls, one on offense, one on defense. You could do both at once. You could alternate, whatever you want to do. Go ahead.
On offense, I think it's easy to look at, Al or Warren, but I know we've given them a lot this year. I thought Nick Singleton had probably, if not his best game of the year, one of his 2 or 3 best games of the year. Really struggled in the first half, probably easy to kind of, get frustrated, but, had the 2 big runs, including the touchdown run to give Penn State the lead they wouldn't give back up. Factoring in receiving, I think he averaged almost 5 or over 5 yards a touch. I thought, again, probably his best game of the year. We mentioned him earlier on defense. Zane Durant, I just thought was a monster. 2.5 tackles for loss. Really affected a lot beyond the actual stats that he put up. Was drawing attention. Was drawing some aggressive blocking techniques, we'll say. But I thought he was kind of the poster boy for how the defense made the plays when they needed to make them, especially in the second half.
Yeah, I'm also going to go with Durant on defense. I don't think Abdul Carter had a quiet game as much as Minnesota just threw everything that it possibly had at trying to slow him down. And when that including, as I believe you referred to them, advanced blocking techniques. But when that happens, Penn State's defense needs someone on the defensive line to be able to make those splash plays or open things up for those splash plays. And for Durant to end 5 tackles, 3 solo, 2.5 tackles for loss. I'm going to see if I can really quickly see how many tackles for loss he has in the season. No, I can't, unfortunately, but just such a really dynamic, really disruptive player. And as we start looking into Penn State in 2025 and, who comes back, who goes to the NFL, that sort of thing, Durant is probably the guy on defense I'm most interested in, whether or not he comes back or whether or not he makes that jump to the NFL. And I was actually also going to go with Singleton on offense, but I'll go with Aller. I thought the way that he was in command of things in the first half, how he was kind of happy to do what the game plan was. I thought that was really mature of him. And with how he took command of things in the second half, whether that was throwing the ball, the way he used his legs, his rushing touchdown was awesome. The way he just took off, knew he was going to get hit, and he said, screw it. I'm going to get licked here. I'm going to be okay, though, because we need to get this touchdown and we need to be able to go into the locker room in that sort of situation. So I'll give it to Drew. Really good game from him. The fact that, it seemed like early in the game they didn't really want to get Warren. They were kind of going away from Warren, in part because Minnesota made it a point to take him out of the game. I thought it was really impressive that Aller was able to get guys like Omari Evans a couple touches, Trey Wallace a few touches, Nick Singleton a few touches in the passing game. But quietly interesting subplot to this season is how Nick Singleton, how he's grown as a receiver and has also kind of replaced Katron Allen as their pass catching running back. And then William Clifford had a catch. So I'll give it to Al. Sure. The guy I want to give it to is Singleton for the reasons you mentioned, but I won't double up with you on both guys. Any final thoughts on Minnesota, Matt, before we spend 5 minutes talking about James Franklin's annual demolition of Maryland?
Well, I'm going to combine those two because I'm really glad they pulled it out, obviously. And I'm really glad that we get the Maryland game this weekend because my heart needs a bit of a break from close games. And they've had we I guess had a couple weeks off after the Ohio State game with Washington and Purdue. But I'm really glad we're going to get the Maryland game going into which I'm allowed to look ahead. I'm not of the 1-0 mentality within the program to a home playoff game here. We'll have a few, I guess it's 3 weeks from Friday or Saturday this week will be the first round of the playoffs. So we will have a what figures to be very restful, very stress-free Saturday afternoon against the Terrapins. And then 3 weeks off with no Penn State football to up our stress levels heading into what figures to almost certainly be a home playoff game in Happy Valley in late December.
Michigan takes care of business this weekend. They're not going to, but if Michigan takes care of business this weekend, we got a trip to Indianapolis coming, baby. But yeah,
that would be in a year with a lot of really, really funny results. I'm struggling off the top of my head to think of anything that would be much funnier than this Michigan team beating this Ohio State team in Columbus. On top of that,
regrettably, one of the answers for a funnier result would be Maryland beating Penn State this weekend, but that's neither here nor there. Maryland coming into this game, they have lost 4 in a row and 6 of their last 7. Their one win was the 29-28 win over USC. They're 4-7 on a year, 1-7 in conference play. Coming into this game, where are they? 84th in SP plus, 93rd offensively, 72nd defensively, 89th on special teams. Penn State opened as a 24.5 point favorite. I think SP plus projects them to win that game by 31. It's one of those games, Matt, where there certainly are things for Penn State to worry about in that. I think Maryland's going to come out for this game charged at they can't make a bowl game, so this is essentially their bowl game. They have a couple of really dangerous receivers in Ty Felton and multi-time former future Penn Stater Caden Prather, who lines up at quarterback between Billy Edwards Jr. and MJ Morris remains to be seen. They're an offense that they haven't always been able to score this season, but like I mentioned, they have talented pass catchers. So a little bit, I don't want to say of a worry or a concern there, but it's one of those games where if all goes right, we're going to see Drew Aller play one drive in the third quarter. And the next time we see Drew Aller play is when he leads the team out of the tunnel for a home playoff game. So I obviously don't think Penn State is going to lose this game. I think that the way that they are really focused and have been really focused after the Ohio State loss has been quite impressive. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe they get off to a little bit of a slow start after just how tough and emotional of a win the Minnesota game was. But ultimately, it would be a surprise if this isn't a comfortable afternoon in Happy Valley.
Yeah, and I think we both shared earlier on social media the Maryland victory graphic from the COVID game on the last time Maryland beat Penn State. So it's worth noting that the two relevant Maryland victories in our lifetime were the 2014 game where Penn State had an offensive line that was made up primarily of former defensive linemen.
Yeah, it was like, didn't they have like 43 scholarship players?
Something like that.
Yeah, with like you mentioned, like an offensive line that had 2 converted defensive tackles at guard, a couple of walk-ons that got like.
And Maryland struggled to win that game. I think it was 19-17 or 20-17, something along those lines.
If I remember correctly, Stephon Diggs also like got a lacerated spleen or something in that game.
Yeah, that was the handshake game.
Yeah.
So they won that game in under unique circumstances, we'll call it, and then obviously the 2020 game with the gathered dozens of family and friends in Beaver Stadium. Since then, I believe it's 112-29. Penn State's outscored them, and Penn State has sacked Maryland quarterbacks 16 times. So averaging over 5 sacks a game in the last 3 years. You mentioned the skill. I mean, it's really where Penn State's dominated this series the last 3 years has really been on the two lines. They're just physically dominant on the defensive line versus Maryland's offensive line, especially. And I would suspect a big day for Abdul Carter, for Zane Durant. Hopefully, Dennis Sutton doesn't need to play a whole lot and can rest up whatever lingering injuries he's been dealing with for a few weeks here now. But I think that's going to be the story of the game is Penn State's ability to really control things up front on both sides of the ball.
I forgot that Josh Gaddis is still Maryland's defensive coordinator, offensive. He might be their defense coordinator too. I don't know, but yeah, like a very interesting subplot of this game is that by the time it kicks off, we are going to know exactly what is next for Penn State with a win, whether that means a trip to Indianapolis out of nowhere or, for all intents and purposes, a home playoff game. So yeah, it's really hard to see how this team that has been so good all season long and not letting, at kind of sensing opportunity and not letting it slip through their fingers, obviously with the Ohio State game is the exception to that, seeing an opportunity here to do something special, seeing an opportunity here to punch their tickets at the college football playoff, seeing an opportunity here to beat up on a program that they really relish the chance to beat up on and not taking advantage of that. I mean, last year, Drew Aller had probably his best game or one of his best games when Penn State went to College Park and again just ran up the score on Maryland, 25 for 34, 240 yards, 4 touchdowns and no interceptions. So I'm excited to see what they have cooked up for the Terps. I'm excited to see hopefully the backups get a lot of run in this game. And I'm excited to see Penn State clinch a playoff berth. It should be, if all goes right, we're going to be in for a really joyous Saturday in Happy Valley. And I can't wait for that. Matt, any final thoughts before I send the people off into their week?
Everyone enjoy your Thanksgiving. Enjoy the annual evisceration of the Maryland Terrapins. That's James Franklin's, I think, favorite Saturday of the year. He will never admit it, but I will admit it for him after the way he was treated there before he left for Vandy. No, I think, like you said, Bill, I think this is going to be an exciting week, regardless of whether it ends up with a chance to play for a Big Ten championship, if the funniest thing ever happens, or like you said, for all intents and purposes, clinching the first ever playoff berth in a home game at that later next month. It should be a pretty exciting holiday weekend in State College.
Do you have a strong preference between Penn State making it to Indianapolis or Penn State getting that extra week before? Because, no matter what they would, well, no, making it to Indianapolis and getting that and not getting that extra week unless they win that game against Oregon, or not going to Indianapolis, getting that extra week, getting the home playoff game, all that?
I'm enough of a traditionalist. I think this qualifies as a traditionalist mindset that chances to play for conference titles should mean something. You deal with the side effect if you don't win that game and you get only the 1 week off. I think you probably still host a home playoff game. But if you have a chance to play for a Big Ten championship for the first time in 8 years, I would think that would be for a team that has dealt with some adversity this year, but other than a couple goal line play series, has come through it in really great shape. The opportunity to play for a championship for what my money is the best league and the best conference in the country this year, especially at the top, would be quite an accomplishment. And again, it would result from the funniest thing ever happening with Michigan beating Ohio State. So I think, whether I know it or not, at least subconsciously, the fact that getting there means that Ohio State lost to this Michigan team, I think makes it a little bit sweeter, because that would just be very, very funny.
Yeah, I want them. Part of it is I just don't know if Penn State would beat Oregon. I think Oregon's probably not a very good matchup for Penn State. But I do like the idea of them getting that extra week of rest, getting that, getting an opportunity to get some guys healthy, get some guys folded in, give Andy Kotelnicki that extra week to get in the lab and cook up some evil genius stuff, all of that. But like you said, like if Penn State ends up making it to the Big Ten championship game, I'm not going to be sitting here and complaining. So we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. If our recap pod involves me and Matt and other folks making plans to make it out to Indianapolis, we will be sure to let all of you know. But regardless, thank you everyone for listening to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. Again, please make sure you go and subscribe wherever you go and get your podcast. If you use Apple Podcasts, please leave us a 5-star review. If you listen to Spotify, leave us 5 stars over there. Wherever you go for your podcast platform of choice, we are probably there, and we would love it if you can give us a 5-star review of any kind. If you want to go over to YouTube, subscribe to us over there, hop into the comments, talk about football and whatever else with anyone who hops into the YouTube comment section. Please follow us on all of our social media channels. Twitter and Blue Sky are the two ones that we are doing the most hanging out on nowadays. And of course, thank you to Home Field Apparel for sponsoring the podcast. And remember, use the promo code RLR24 for 15% off of your first order. One last time, thank you everyone for listening to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. For Matt DeBear, I'm Bill DeFilippo. Take care, everyone.